Okay. Good day. Welcome to the webinar Herbivorous Fish to Improve Coral Reef Health, Science and Regional Regulatory Measures. I'm Laura Yanis from AGRRA, the Inter-American Association for Environmental Defense. I'm going to assist you with technical support and regard from Mexico City. Today, we will learn about the monitoring and regulation measures for the conservation of herbivorous fish. These species are very important for the health and ecological functions of coral reefs. We will hear from experts who are working for reef conservation in the Mesoamerican Reef System, Bonaire Island, and other territories of the wider Caribbean region. If you have any question, please find in your question section, here's in Spanish, but you will have it in maybe in English, like questions. Please type them and let us know to whom you are asking to, please. We will have 20 minutes at the end of the presentation to respond them. So I want to welcome to Ileana Lopez she's the Spot Protocol Program Officer from the United Nations of Environment Program Secretariat of the Cartagena Convention representative. She's going to give the welcome to the seminar and introduction. Camila Thompson, attorney of the Marine Program of AGRRA. He's going to talk about the importance of herbivorous fish regulation for coral reefs in the wider Caribbean region. Patricia Richards Kramer, she's director of the Atlantic and Gulf Rapid Reef Assessment, AGRRA. She's going to talk about the status and trends of parrotfish in the Caribbean, updates from the AGRRA program. Bryce Simmons, he's director from the California Cooperative Oceanic Fisheries Investigation, COFI, and associate professor from the Scripps Institution of Oceanography of the UC San Diego. He's going to talk about the long-term trends in Caribbean parrotfish abundance at local, regional, and basin-wide scale, implication for fisheries and ecosystem management. Melanie McField, she's founder of and director of the Healthy Reefs and Healthy People Initiative. She's going to talk about the collaborative monitoring and reporting help to protect parrotfish and improve reef health in the Mesoamerican Reef. And finally, Robert Stenek, professor of Oceanography, Marine Biology, and Marine Policy, School of Marine Sciences from the University of Maine, and Pew Fellow of Marine Conservation. He's going to talk about parrotfish and the recovery resilience of coral reefs as case study from Bonaire. For more information, here you have our websites and social media spaces. So I'm going to make welcome to Ileana and all the speakers. Thank you for your assistance. And here you have Ileana.
Thank you so much.
Now, welcome.
Okay. Can you see my screen?
Yeah.
Okay, good morning, everybody. Hello from the dusty Kingston, from the Sahara dust that many people is asking me in Europe. I didn't even knew about that event. I would like to give you a big welcome to everybody, to the experts, and I would like to give a special thanks to Gladys Martinez de Lemos, senior attorney from the Inter-American Association for the Environmental Defense, as well as all the colleagues for AGRRA, Laura, Camilo. And I would like to give you a very short, brief snapshot of the Cartagena Convention Secretariat. Just to give you an idea for those of you that are not familiar with our work. So, as you are aware, for those of you that know, the Cartagena Conventions aims to promote cooperation for the protection and development of the wider Caribbean region, and the way how we do this is about integrated management. Something interesting about the convention is this a regional binding international instrument, and it comprises around 46 members between contracting parties and territories. The Cartagena Convention works through 3 protocols: the pollution from oil spills that has 26 contracting parties, the specially protected areas and wildlife expo 17, and the land-based sources of activities and marine pollution, the LBS, with 14. Each of them is supported for regional activity centers that are across the Caribbean. For example, for the oil spills is RAC, Rempetec, and we have SCAR, SPORAC, and the AMET has the CIMAB and IMA. I am going to go very quickly about the an overview of the SPASU program. So our mandate is the management of protected areas, managed areas in the wider Caribbean region. And we work, as you may know, about the conservation of threatened and endangered species. That's why we are together today. We aim to bring information exchange, training, and assistance to contracting parties. How we do this is just, for example, we have support to the different practitioners and networks of marine protected areas, such as CAMPAM. We do this also in collaboration with the SPORAC. And as far as today, we have 35 listed protected areas with a special criteria. There are 3 annexes at the end of the protocol. One, Annex 1 for flora. This is for a strictly protected species. Annex 2 is for fauna, and this is mostly strictly 2, and for the regulated exploitation and sustainable is for Annex 3. That's how we are going to give, I'm going to give you a very quick kind of round of information in 2 minutes about how we work. We work with marine mammals. For example, these are the different partners that we work with. IUCN, IFAO, CARIMAN is one of the projects supported by the EU, IUCN, and so on, the International Whaling Commission. We work with invasive species, and we record and monitor the species Sargassum, which is a very important issue in the region, and we work with the group of experts on the scientific aspects of the environment. And in general, we work with Caribe from UNESCO, the University of South Florida, and also we have a regional working group to take care of this issue at regional level. As important is the fishing species that we work, and we also produce action plans in cooperation with partners and donors for a species, for example, queen conch or lobster. In the case of turtles, there are a very important group of species in the wider Caribbean. We work with the Sea Turtle Conservation Network, Wildcasts, which is one of our huge and wonderful partners. And for coral reefs, here you have represented today several of our colleagues from ICRRI. They are also chairing GCRMN. We have the Healthy Reefs represented here today. We work also with Reef Check in Dominican Republic. And we have projects like Carib Coast. More specifically going to the herbivorous fishes in the coral reefs, we have a working group that discusses species, which you saw the list of annexes. So there is discussion among experts if they should go or not to a specific list. And this list tells with scientific information, regulations, and monitoring and the state of the species, if they should be evaluated to be listed as one of the annexes of the protocol. With that saying, I would like to thank you for your attention, and I would like to say that I took this phrase from someone in one scientific paper this morning, and I say, suppose that the ultimate standard of our work were to be not professionalism and profitability, but the health and durability of human and natural communities. This is Wendell Berry. Thank you so much. And I would like to invite Camilo, the attorney from AGRRA, that is going to make his presentation. Thank you, Camilo.
Thank you, Ileana. Can you see my screen? I think yes.
Yes.
So we very much appreciate you joining us today in this conversation of importance of herbivorous fish protection in the wider Caribbean region and their key role for healthy coral reefs. For 20 years, AGRRA has been working on environmental protection in some of the world's most vulnerable communities and critically endangered habitats in Latin America. We use the law and science to protect sensitive ecosystems and communities suffering from environmental harm. The marine team works advocating for improved policies and practices to achieve critical marine conservation goals throughout the region. Okay, so coral reefs are vital ecosystem for human population. This ecosystem is home to about 1/4 of all marine species of the world. Coral reefs environmental services include critical spawning grounds for fishes, tourism, and buffer to protect coastal areas from storm damage and climate change. Imagine the estimated value of 1/4 kilometer of coral reefs is between US 100,000 and US 600,000. Sadly, this ecosystem is threatened by uncontrolled human activities and climate change impacts. Over 50% of the world's coral reefs have died in the last 30 years, and up to 90% may die within the next century. We have global threats such as bleaching, ocean acidification, sea temperature rise, and regional threats such as overfishing, pollution, and nutrient increase the growth of macroalgae and sediments. Plus, to not enough water sanation altogether force coral reefs and species to decease. According to the Intergovernmental Panel of Climate Change, the IPCC, if temperature increases 2 degrees, the ecosystem will collapse. Therefore, all of us will suffer economic, social, and health consequences. AIDA advocates for proactive policies to protect and restore the health of our coral reefs and key species of reef fish, such as parrotfish and other important herbivorous fish. But why should we protect herbivorous fish? Herbivorous fish help keep coral reefs healthy, control the abundance of macroalgae, and support coral recruitment. Moreover, they are natural eroders, producing sediments like the white sand we see on beaches, where some species can excrete between 40 kilograms and 200 kilograms of sand per year. Herbivorous fish and coral reefs are a relationship we must protect. AIDA is currently working in the Reef Fish Conservation Project, in collaboration with many stakeholders as academia, NGOs, government from countries and regions in both the wider Caribbean and the tropical Eastern Pacific. Our goal is that policies recognize the importance of those species at international, regional, and domestic levels. As a SPO protocol observer, we are collaborating in the Species Working Group to evaluate nomination of parrotfish species and other important herbivorous fish for coral reefs. In the following slide, we can see the wider Caribbean region. 17 countries ratified the SPO protocol, as you can see in the map. However, the whole region has 28 states and 20 island territories, and only 7 territories and 13 states have regulatory measures. For some herbivorous fish, there is a bigger need to do to ecosystem threats. Under the SPO protocol framework, species should be included in Appendix 2 and 3. The protocol criteria state that essential species for vulnerable ecosystems, like corals, should be regulated. Appendix 2 prohibits the exploitation of the species, and Appendix 3 regulates the sustainable management of a species population. In our previous seminar, we heard from representatives of environment and fisheries ministries about successful experience in herbivorous fish regulation. Today, we will continue learning from marine science, monitoring, and the regional vision of herbivorous fish in the Caribbean. Thank you very much for your time. Now I give the floor to our first scientist speaker, Patricia Kramer. The mic is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Camilo. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you, Ileana and Camilo, for hosting this. I think this is a really wonderful opportunity to bring together some great experts in the field who have been working on parrotfish for a very long time. So I'm excited that we have this opportunity to talk today. My name is Patricia Kramer, and I'm with the AGRRA program. I'm also a GCRMN steering committee member and on the SPAL protocol working observer for the working group for herbivorous fish. As Camilo gave a really great introduction, I kind of wanted to set the stage of, giving us a virtual dive underwater and thinking of us underwater on the reefs and reminding ourselves why we are so interested in protecting those species and the reefs themselves. They provide high biodiversity, they provide food and fishing for coastal communities, they protect our shorelines, and they give us tourism and recreation. And I think a lot of us right now would love to be underwater. And if you have the chance to, I hope you really do enjoy it. But our reefs did not always look like this picture I just showed you. Currently, our reefs are not in the best shape. Over the last several decades, our reefs have undergone a severe shift in the health of the reefs. The picture on the right kind of shows what a nice healthy reef looks like with abundant herbivores, with herbivorous fish such as parrotfish and surgeonfish, also diadema, which were key grazers on the reef. Back in the 1980s, due to a disease, we lost a lot of the diadema, and also a disease that wiped out a large portion of the major reef building corals, the AGRRRA corals. And we started to see a shift from coral dominated reefs to more algal dominated reefs. And it really made us understand that herbivorous fish and herbivores in general played a very important functional role. And we started to see the shift to reefs that were more vulnerable, and we started to lose coral cover as they were being outcompeted by algae, and also starting to lose reef structure. And several reefs have now degraded to the point where they're eroding away, and they've lost those key biodiversity features on them. One of the things that we can do to help protect reefs and help to restore them is to protect herbivores because of their important role as grazers. By increasing herbivory, we can also help to give corals that competitive advantage back over algae, and also it can open up space for new coral recruits to settle. So parrotfish are really key grazers that help to keep the seaweed from overgrowing and killing corals, and large-sized parrotfish are particularly effective at removing algae. Two really important actions that happened back around 2012 was the listing of the rainbow parrotfish on the IUCN Red List. It is the only species of the parrotfish species or the family that is listed. And also the report of the status and trends of Caribbean coral reefs by Jeremy Jackson and everybody was a really important call to action to protect parrotfish and also to protect it under the SPAL protocol. And so as part of this review, we started to look at information on what kinds of data needs to be reviewed in order to list species under the different annexes that Camilo had talked about. Certain data such as size of populations, evidence of decline, restrictions of the range of the species, if populations have been fragmented, also looking at population dynamics and the vulnerability of the species. But I think most key to herbivorous fish, particularly parrotfish, is their importance of the species in maintaining fragile and vulnerable coral reef ecosystems. As part of the AGRRRA program, for the last 20 years, we have worked with partners in the Caribbean to help build capacity, do training, do surveys throughout the region. And also, one of the key things is sharing this information. There is a great opportunity to share information and learn from one another. And so as part of the review process, we started looking at the parrotfish data in the region. We have over 26,000 fish transects from over 3,000 different surveys in the region. And this is a collaborative effort. It really is a team effort from partners in the region who are going out and collecting this data and who are willing to share it to help promote coral conservation and understanding of the reefs. Our target kind of key indicators that we look at looking at the complex relationships on reefs, are those key herbivores, which are the herbivorous fish and diadema urchins, the foundation of the reefs themselves, the corals, and also the recruitment of new corals into the population, and how they interact with the macroalgae, which is being competitive, and also with higher level predators like commercial species. So these are some of our key indicators that we look at. Today, I just wanted to focus on the herbivorous fish, and later in the webinar, we're going to hear more about how herbivorous fish are important to all of this reef function from Bob Stenick and Melanie McField. To start with, we pulled out parrotfish biomass from 13 countries that we are working with. This is a map of the Caribbean. The outlines that you see are the EEZs for each of the countries. And the data that is being shown is parrotfish average biomass. The darker the shade of color, the higher the biomass. And parrotfish biomass is something that is one of the key metrics that we use to kind of track how parrotfish are doing. As you can see, there is a difference throughout the region. There's a lot of spatial variability in the biomass itself. The gray areas are areas where we still have gaps, and this is one of the opportunities that we're looking forward to through this process, is working with colleagues throughout the region to start to fill in those gap areas. But for today, I wanted to focus on these 13 countries that we have information for. We wanted to look at why are we seeing some of these patterns that are different in biomass. You can see Turks and Caicos, Navassa, Belize have some of the higher parrotfish biomass. And so we wanted to ask the question, are some parrotfish species more vulnerable to fishing pressures? This graph here is showing the mean body size of parrotfish, starting at the bottom or the smallest of the parrotfish, and moving up is the top one is a rainbow parrotfish. And from many papers and research that's been done, there is a trend that those species that are larger in body size tend to be targeted for fishing more and more vulnerable to unsustainable fishing practices, to traps or spear fishing, or just hook and line fishing. And so we wanted to compare some of these species. And so we looked at end numbers and a middle number. So we took the rainbow parrotfish, which is the largest of the parrotfish. It's more of a rare species. It's slower growing. And the stoplight parrotfish is a medium-bodied parrotfish. And then the striped parrotfish, which is one of the smallest parrotfish, one of the smaller parrotfishes, but they're quite abundant. So we wanted to look at key metrics for those and compare these parrotfish, 3 parrotfish species and level of fishing pressure. And so we took a subset of the database and we looked at lower fishing pressure. The criteria we used there's a qualitative criteria to compare lower fishing pressure with higher fishing pressure, was based on criteria such as, did they have existing regulations to protect herbivorous fish? Do they have long-standing enforcement that has been working? Do they have a low population compared to the amount of reef area that they have? So those were some of the criteria. So for lower fishing pressure areas, we selected the Bahamas, the Turks and Caicos, and Belize. And we compared it to areas that have had a history of higher fishing pressure, such as Haiti, Jamaica, Dominican Republic. And the metrics that we looked at were sighting frequency, abundance, size, biomass. And it's these different metrics that help us give insight into how these species are doing. The results that I'm showing are preliminary example, but it's to give you an idea of, once we start gathering more information for the Caribbean as a whole, we'll be able to start to look at how parrotfish are doing. I wanted to start with the rainbow parrotfish. As I said, this is the largest parrotfish. It is listed in IUCN Red List as near threatened, and the population trend is considered decreasing. There has not been an update since 2012, so almost 12 years. Actually, the data was 2009 it's based on, so it's been about a decade. So this is a really good opportunity to revisit how this particular endangered species or near threatened species is doing. When we compared populations between lower fishing pressure areas and higher fishing pressure areas, we did see some differences. First off, these are very rare species for most of the Caribbean. In some areas like the Florida Keys, they're much more abundant, but in most of the Caribbean, the chance that you will see it on a reef is very low. So the first one is on lower fishing pressure reefs, the sighting frequency was low. but it was even more rare if you were to see it on a reef that had higher fishing pressure. The abundance is also low, but even lower on higher fishing pressure areas. One thing that was encouraging was that the sighting frequency of those fish that were greater than 30 centimeters was higher on lower fishing reefs than it was on those reefs, or lower fishing reefs than it was on higher fishing reefs. So we're seeing larger fish on reefs that have protection, especially those that have had long protection for a long time. But the biomass is still very low and much lower on those reefs that are under high fishing pressure. As I said, this species is a large species. It can get caught in traps very easily. It's easy to spearfish, and so it can be easily targeted. The average size for rainbow parrotfish was 26 centimeters, and that was based on a small sample size, but a lot of surveys. There's only 132 that we saw in lower fishing pressure areas, and only 11 that we saw in higher fishing pressure areas. So this is a really rare species. One of the potential management recommendations to help promote the recovery of this species would be to just do a full protection and also enforce that and make sure that the species is not being caught illegally. So this is kind of our end member of a species that is a large bodied fish, and it's very highly susceptible to fishing pressure. This is a map of the rainbow parrotfish biomass throughout the Caribbean. Again, the darker the shade, the higher the biomass. So areas like the Bahamas, Belize, Mexico, St. Vincent and the Grenadines all had had higher abundances or biomass than other areas. And this species is also unique from some of the other species in that it is dependent on mangrove habitats. It's not a sole coral reef species. It spends part of its time in mangrove habitats, using it for a nursery area. And so they do migrate back and forth, which can cause increased susceptibility to fishing, but also with the loss of mangrove habitat due to coastal conversion, the species has been losing that key nursery habitat. One thing we looked at was looking at the mangrove area. So the darker shades that you see on the map are mangrove area throughout the Caribbean. So areas like Cuba have very high mangrove area. If we had the data available for the Florida Keys and Everglades, you would also see that was very high as well. But you can see some areas like the small island nations may not have the high biomass, which may explain some of its lower abundance of rainbow parrotfish, but also that they may be more highly susceptible because the mangroves that they do have is even more important for those fish. The different icons on the map, the ones that are a colorful fish, is data that we have from 2010 to present. And you can see the countries where these species have been observed. So areas like Belize, in St. Vincent and the Grenadines, and also St. Kitts, which has a nice mangrove and seagrass area. You do see the species there. The lighter colored fish is where we have data from earlier surveys from 1998 to 2010. So it provides a historic baseline. So if there's new information that we have for those areas, we can compare it to historical information for those areas. And you can see for an area like Cuba, where Pedro Alcalado had done some of the first surveys back in the 1998 timeframe, they did see probably the highest biomass of rainbow parrotfish that we have data for. The next species I wanted to talk about really today was a moderate sized species, the Stoplight Parrotfish species. This is a species that tends to be quite abundant on reefs next to the smaller striped parrotfish. They may be lower in density, but they usually are higher in biomass because they reach a larger size. They are effective grazers, so they are very key to keeping that algae cropped and opening up space for corals. When we compare between lower fishing pressure areas and higher fishing pressure areas, we only saw some differences, mostly in size and biomass. So on both reefs, they were very abundant and present, and you were likely to see them on a fished reef or an unfished reef. The biomass was much higher and the size was much higher, so the likelihood of seeing a larger fish that was greater than 30 centimeters. And I said earlier that those fish, herbivorous fish that are of large body size, tend to be more effective grazers in removing the algae. So you would see more of those on those lower fishing pressure areas versus the higher fishing pressure areas. Also the size difference on lower fishing pressure areas, their average size was 17 centimeters in length, and that was from nearly 6,000 fish observed. And on higher fishing pressure reefs, the average size was only 12 centimeters. This species reaches maturity about 16.3 centimeters. So they're reaching that mature age on those areas that have less fishing pressure. But on those areas that do have higher fishing pressure, those species are not reaching a large enough size to reproduce. So potential management recommendation could be ban all harvest because they are key herbivores, because they are susceptible because of their large body size, or at a minimum, protect larger bodied individuals. So it's very key to protect these species as well. This map shows the stoplight parrotfish biomass throughout the region. Again, the darker the color, the shade, the higher the biomass. So areas like Turks and Caicos and St. Vincent Grenadines and Belize and Honduras had some of the higher stoplight parrotfish biomass. There are gaps here, and so we're looking forward, like I said before, to working to fill in some of those gaps. I've been in contact with some partners already to help fill those gaps, so we're looking forward to filling this map in more. But you can see that areas like Jamaica, Haiti, Dominican Republic, the biomass is much larger. You do find them there. They can be abundant. They're just much smaller in size. The striped parrotfish is the smaller of the parrotfish species. It's the other end member. And there was the only difference that we saw here was their abundance was high on lower fishing pressure reefs, but interestingly, it was higher on higher fishing pressure reefs. And this in part is likely due to the fact that those reefs that are being overfished, they're removing some of those top predators that would normally feed on them, which is opening up a whole new niche for these fish to come in and to reproduce and to grow without having predators to feed and cull them out. So their abundance was quite high on both low fishing pressure reefs and higher fishing pressure reefs. Although their biomass was kind of moderate on the lower fishing, and again higher on the higher fishing reefs. They just have that opportunity to reproduce. There's lots of little ones out there, and they're having a chance to grow bigger. The size, the average length for both fish and lower fish and higher fish reefs was similar, about 9 centimeters. So one of the recommendations is, again, you ban all parrotfish fishing. You have the opportunity to protect the whole guild, or at a minimum, protect those large-bodied ones so that they can continue to reproduce. These species are grazers as well, but not as effective as removing as much algae as some of those larger bodied and other species that are more effective at removing some of the more toxic macroalgae. This map is showing the striped parrotfish biomass, again, darker shades, higher biomass. And you can see areas like Jamaica, Haiti, Dominican Republic have some higher biomass in those areas. So to summarize some of the things that we're trying to look at here is that fishery independent measures of parrotfish populations are very important for the management of Caribbean reefs. Usually fishing regulations are based on catch data and not necessarily on fishing independent measures of data. So the combination of them could be quite insightful and help provide better regulations. I also wanted to add to that socioeconomic information and information from communities is also very key. And I think we can learn a lot by joining between scientists, managers, and local fishermen to understand these populations better. One of the most useful indicators of the metrics that I was talking about is the reef function and management, or biomass and size-specific sighting frequencies. Species-specific responses to fishing pressure can be highly variable depending upon life histories and vulnerability. And we saw this between the rainbow parrotfish and the small striped parrotfish. Protecting the entire guild of parrotfish will have the greatest benefit to coral reef function, followed by species or size-specific fisheries measures that increase the protection for more abundant and larger bodied parrotfish species such as queen, yellowtail, redtail, stoplight, and redband. One of the things I wanted to share, because I think this is something that's very important, especially for protection and management of parrotfish, is new challenges. About 15 years ago, we were looking at lionfish as one of those new threats, and then sargassum became a new threat. But now in the Caribbean, we have stony coral tissue loss disease, which is spreading throughout the Caribbean. And this is a new disease, and it has very different than other diseases that we have seen. There are more than 20 species of coral that are affected. It spreads rapidly within a week to 2 months. There's high prevalence and mortality. Mortality happens very quickly, and it affects so many different species. So on some reefs, they've lost up to 30% of coral on that. Here is a map. This is from, we help host a disease website on the AGRRA website. It's a platform where you can go and enter data. And actually, I just woke up this morning and saw we have a new purple dot. The purple dot is a new sighting, and that was in Guadeloupe. And the red dots are showing you where stony coral tissue loss disease has been confirmed. And the green dots are where there have been surveys, but the disease has not been observed. And this is stony coral tissue loss disease is going to affect the structure and the function. And I think it brings home the point of why it's even more important to protect parrotfish, because it's something that we can actually do. You know, we can reduce our human influence by protecting parrotfish, which would hopefully alleviate some of the negative effects that are occurring because of stony coral tissue loss disease. You can find out more. There's a Caribbean dashboard on the AGRRA website that's hosted by AGRRA, MPA Connect, GCFI, and NOAA. Currently, there are 12 countries that are being affected. And if you haven't been out on your reef lately and you have a chance to, the more eyes on the water, the better, because we're starting to see it in areas we have not seen it before. So to kind of recap, this is an opportunity, as Ileana said, to help review the criteria for the SPA protocol. I find criteria 1 and 10 are especially important because we can look at how this species is important to fragile coral reef ecosystems. And just to kind of recap, you know, parrotfish are very important on the reefs. They play a key functional role through their grazing activity, and even more so now that diadema has died off and it's not recovering throughout the Caribbean. And protecting sufficient numbers of herbivores can increase grazing intensity to levels that can help shift that balance back towards more coral-dominated reefs.
Patricia?
Yep.
Yeah, we are running a little bit over time. Yeah, but you are perfect. Thanks.
That's it. So my closing slide is I just want to thank all the AGRRA partners who have been so willing to share data over the last 20 years, because I think it really helps our collective knowledge for this. And also to encourage, if you do have information or would like to collaborate and share information on the status of parrotfish, please let us know. Thank you.
Hey, hello everybody. Thank you, Patricia. Can you hear me and see my screen?
Yeah, we can listen you and we are seeing very well.
Great. Okay. Great. Well, thank you, Patricia. That talk really segues nicely into what I was going to talk about today. So I'm going to give a brief presentation regarding some reasonably long-term trends in parrotfish populations throughout the Caribbean. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to look at trends through time for different species, and also look at the extent to which species locally are doing the same thing, and then finally wrap up by talking about the management implications of these trends. The story behind this is kind of already been codified or laid out by Patricia, and it was really sort of set in place by this report by Jeremy Jackson and a bunch of other folks. It was really kind of the first of its time to synthesize trends in coral reefs in the Caribbean over a long window of time. And one of the key messages from this report was the story of herbivores in the Caribbean, and the fact that you know, by the early 1980s, diadema die-off, which at the time diadema were the dominant herbivores on coral reefs and really controlled the competitive interactions between space occupiers like algae and coral. When diadema had a disease run through the population regionally, there was not a lot of parrotfish remaining to pick up the slack in terms of taking over the role of being dominant herbivores, in large part because throughout a lot of the Caribbean, parrotfishes were fairly heavily targeted. And as a result, the mediation of competitive interactions between coral and algae was reduced, and reefs started to lose coral cover. So dropping to maybe 1/6 of what once was Caribbean coral cover. And so in the report, the suggestion strongly was, let's stop fishing for parrotfish. The two sort of key recommendations was adopt some management that addresses fishing in parrotfish and restores parrotfish populations under the SPA protocol, which we've just heard quite a bit about. And I, like Patricia, and am an observer on the SPA working group for herbivorous fishes in the Caribbean. So the report suggested that under the SPA protocol, parrotfishes should be addressed in terms of conservation and recovery. And the other key recommendation was that, hey, we really need to simplify and standardize monitoring throughout the Caribbean over long windows of time to better understand what the heck's going on and how parrotfishes are responding to conservation action. Well, it turns out that there is, in fact, a reasonably long-term monitoring program in the Caribbean that's pretty simple, and that's region-wide and has very broad and deep coverage. And that's populated by citizen scientists, so divers, people that often flood the Caribbean, going on their dive vacations and jumping on boats and getting dropped off at popular dive sites. And with this program through the Reef Environmental Education Foundation, which is a citizen science marine conservation nonprofit, divers are able to take a slate down with them and a survey sheet, and over the course of their normal diving experience, when they get dropped onto that site, they can write down and record every single species of fish that they can positively identify, and they can also record the relative abundance of those fishes on a log scale. So single, few, many, and abundant. Single would be 1, few is 2 to 10 fish, many is 11/100, and abundant is more than 100. So really kind of recording objectively log scale abundance of the fishes that they've seen. And this program started in '93. Since '93, there have been over 160,000 individual surveys by divers through almost 30 years. So let's make use of these data. Let's take these reef data and see what they tell us in terms of trends in parrotfishes over time, and then look at how those trends relate to one another in terms of different species, both locally and across the Caribbean basin. And this will allow us, at least at the level of tourism diving depths, that'll allow us to say something about what parrotfish are doing through time. And as Patricia mentioned, there's not a lot of good fisheries independent data. In fact, in the Caribbean, there's not a lot of good fisheries data. So any type of long-term data like this is worthy of approach for asking questions about things like parrotfish abundance and trends through time. And because it's on the log scale, I'm just going to show a little bit of math. Because we're recording abundance on the log scale, populations in log space operate as basically a linear function. And so if we can look at the relative change in abundance categories reported through time, we expect that approximates the change in log abundance of these parrotfishes through time. And so we do that. And we're going to take a look at these sort of medium to small bodied fishes, many of which are the characters that have already been introduced by Patricia. So we've got the queen parrotfish, red band, stoplight, princess, and striped parrotfish. I picked these both because they're fairly common throughout the Caribbean and because they're fairly conspicuous. It's easy for volunteers to be able to separate and identify these species. So I have good confidence that the data reported by reef volunteers and citizen scientists is in fact faithful to the true abundance of these fishes through time. And this is just to show you what the number of surveys through time looks like in the reef database. So you can see it started in '93 and it really ramped up quite quickly. And across the rest of the time window, we've got pretty good coverage, thousands and thousands of surveys per year throughout the Caribbean basin. So let's take a look at several different locations broadly spanning the range of the Caribbean So here's our Pirates map of the Caribbean, and we're going to put red X's where we're going to look at trends in these parrotfishes. So we've got the Florida Keys, including Key West and Key Largo. We've got Cozumel. We've got Honduras, which includes 2 locations, Roatan and Utila. Then we've got the Cayman Islands to include Little Cayman and Grand Cayman. And then down in the Netherlands Antilles area, we've got Bonaire and Curacao. And then in the Virgin Islands, we've got Tortola in the British Virgin Islands, as well as St. Thomas. So these areas kind of span the Caribbean, but they also have very good coverage in the Caribbean database, reef database. So this is just a plot demonstrating the proportion of all surveys from these regions that has been conducted in each and every year through time. So what you'll notice is that the Florida Keys really and Bonaire really sort of dominate in terms of the number of surveys conducted, but there's reasonable coverage of surveys throughout almost the entire time window of the 30 years that the reef program has taken place. Okay, so let's look at first trends based on species. First, we're going to look at the princess parrotfish species. Below on the bottom, you're going to see a graph with the different trends in those species at the different locations. So here's what are parrotfish log abundances doing through time at each of Key Largo, Cozumel, Grand Cayman, Roatan, Tortola, and Bonaire. And I've split just for visualizing the data. I fit a spline to these points at the different locations, and then the matrix that you're looking at is a matrix of correlations in the time series between these different locations, where I've highlighted the cells based on yellow if they're positive, and red if they're significantly positive. And the key takeaway here is there's not a clear trend across all locations in this species through time, and that across these different locations, even close proximity locations like Grand Cayman and Little Cayman or Roatan and Utila, there aren't really significant correlations in what that species is doing. So parrotfish, like this princess parrotfish, appear to be doing reasonably different things depending on where you look in the Caribbean. They're not all following the same fate. And if we look at queen parrotfish, we see the same type of result where at different locations, the species population is doing different things in terms of trends, no strong correlations. Striped parrotfish, this is of this parrotfish we're looking at, it shows the strongest set of correlations and also the most similarity in terms of increasing trends across all locations. And this kind of dovetails with what Patricia was talking about in terms of this species being a weedy species and one that we might expect and in fact do see more of in areas that are heavily fished. So this kind of portends that across the Caribbean basin, pretty strong evidence that increasing impacts to parrotfish populations is allowing this species to expand its population generically. And then finally, I can't remember, stoplight parrotfish, same thing, not a lot of clear trends, and red band parrotfish doing different things in different locations. Some positive correlations, but what's striking to me in this result is that I was expecting to see these different species to tend to do the same things in similar locations, Tortola and St. Thomas, for instance, or Bonaire and Curacao, and we really didn't see that. But let's look at what the trends based on sites is. So if we just take all of the different species that we're looking at, princess, queen, red band, stoplight, and parrot, and striped parrotfish, and then look at the trends of each of those species together in a single location, in this case, Bonaire. And again, I've plotted using both individual data points and splines, the trends in those different species in Bonaire as a whole across years. And the matrix shows you a matrix of correlations between these species. And it's all red. And the reason it's all red is because all of those correlations are very significant. In fact, some of these correlations are 90+% correlated in these species. And if I just plot without a spline, if I plot these data, then you can really see why that correlation is so tight. It's not just that the generic trends of these species through time tend to match each other, but that the year-to-year ups and downs are very tightly correlated. So species are operating as a functional group or guild and are very tightly correlated in their response to drivers, whether or not those drivers be environmental like storms or anthropogenic like increases or decreases to fishing pressure. So species act as a group, and that holds whether or not we're in Bonaire or in this case in Grand Cayman. We've seen the same results, and we see the same results in Tortola. So across the Caribbean basin, locally, parrotfish operate as a group, and they respond to things as a group. There were some locations, for instance, like Roatan and even Key Largo, where those correlations are not quite as strong. Although broadly positive in terms of correlations, individual species are tending at least a little bit to do their own thing. And I'm not sure why that would be. One might think that some of these results are due to observation, patterns of observation, just because we're dealing with divers and we don't tell them where to go. But the fact that we have the most data from Key Largo and the most data from Bonaire, and they're showing us two different things in terms of correlation among species, suggests that this isn't just an artifact of the observation process. There's something ecologically going on that's different between places like Key Largo versus Bonaire. But nonetheless, broadly across regions, when you look at a local site, those species are operating in lockstep with each other and responding to drivers the same way. And so if we take a conclusion from this, it's that parrotfish complex tends to respond to external forcing as a block. They do the same thing. If you decrease fishing pressure, they're probably all going to go up, not just one species. And if we broaden that out, there's no synchrony of common trends in a particular species, depending on where you are in the Caribbean. So stoplight parrotfish are doing something completely different in Grand Cayman than they are in Roatan or Cozumel. And so if I were to roll all of this up, I would say that there's a good news, bad news story. The bad news story is that we've got to be really responsive to what parrotfish are doing locally within a region. And we've got to cater and customize our management to that region specifically. The good news is a rising tide floats all boats. If you can come up with management strategies to increase the number of parrotfish of one particular species, chances are really good you're also going to increase the abundance of all your other parrotfish species. And as Patricia mentioned, one of the important parts of the functional role of parrotfish as herbivores on Caribbean coral reefs is that diversity is an important component of effective control of algae and promoting the recruitment and recovery of corals. So what's good for the goose is good for the gander. If we can restore one population of parrotfish, we're probably going to do well at restoring all of them. Okay, and then quickly caveats. We talked about this is not size data, it's only abundance data. So buyer beware, we're not talking about biomass here, we're talking about numbers of individual fish. And we're also talking about where divers go. And so divers tend to visit places that fishers tend to avoid. So it may be that we're painting an overly rosy picture of the Caribbean in terms of trends in parrotfish. Nonetheless, the findings of correlation across species is a strong one in terms of how we approach management. Okay, and then quick thanks to all of the divers that spend thousands of dollars to go diving in far-flung locations and spend all of their dive vacation poring over fish ID books and collecting data and entering them online for free, which is crazy, but it's useful for all of us because now we have a picture of what parrotfish species are doing through time. And with that, I will say thanks. And I am now going to pass the mic over to Melanie McField. Let's see if I can do this. Oh, good.
Okay, can you guys see my screen and hear me?
Yes.
All right. Today we're going to talk about collaborative monitoring and reporting to protect parrotfish and improve the health of the Mesoamerican reef. And it's not going forward. There we go. There's our parrotfish. So that's what we want to do, put the parrotfish back on the reef. So a Healthy Reefs initiative began in 2004, and we are the group that started the report cards for the health of the reef, but we also do eco audits that track the implementation of management measures and kind of urge our governments in the region to do more and promote these conservation measures. And the network that we have is now 73 different partner organizations. This is them. Those are international, national, and local community-based groups that are all focused on conserving the Mesoamerican reef. So when I talk about the royal we of Healthy Reefs, this is who I'm talking about. This is where the strength comes from. We're largely known for being, the monitoring group. So we spend a lot of time training our colleagues and the rest of these partners. Often they're the managing agencies in the Mesoamerican Reef that, many of the NGOs are the actual managers of parks. So those are a lot of our partners. We train, we do databases, and we have 256 users of the database. Here's what the interface looks like. So I encourage you all to go to healthyreefs.org and have a little look. We thank AGRRA for creating this for us, and it's a visual and spatial mapping tool. So you can look at parrotfish, or you can look at reef health or coral cover, whatever you would like to look at. So that was a little preview of our 4 main indicators. This is what we consider to be the key elements of reef health. And we spent a lot of time since 2004 to 2007 when we kind of completed this and began to prepare our first report card, developing these thresholds. And others have used these and in the wider Caribbean, and I think they're a pretty good general guide. I think you can see my cursor. No, you can't see it. But if you just look at the good category for herbivorous biomass, 2,700, you have to have 2,700 grams per 100 meters squared in order to get a good ranking for parrotfish. That's parrotfish plus acanthurids. So we take those 2 families and lump them together as the main herbivores, like in different regions. And then we have that for all 4 of those indicators. We have these thresholds mapped out. So with that, you can combine the 4. So the 4 indicators count equally, and that gives us our overview of reef health. So we can actually talk about this large ecosystem of the Mesoamerican reef and know, like, over time, we track its health, and we can track it by country. We can look at the percent of these sites. We had 286 sites in our last report card. And, look at most of them are in poor condition. That's 47% compared to 29 in fair and only 8 in good. So looking more specifically at the numbers of these 4 indicators, all 286 reefs just put together. Those are different countries, different management zones, different depths, but let's just look at the big picture of our reef. We've got 19% live coral cover, 20% fleshy macroalgal cover, 729 grams of commercial fish. Sorry, that's the snappers and groupers. We kind of target that group and call them the main commercial, just like we target the families of acanthurids and parrotfish as the main herbivorous fish. So you can see that Belize, in this last report, our 2020 report card, just inched its way up into the good category, just barely made it into that good category. And that is largely dominated by the parrotfish. They are the bulk of that biomass. It's actually, that's a typo. It's 75% parrotfish, 25% surgeonfish. So just so you know that, the parrotfish are a important component of this overall reef health, because the herbivorous fish counts for 25% and parrotfish alone as a family counts for 75% of that. Now, over time, just looking at this is the index. So this is like the Dow Jones Industrial Average for the reef. This is our numbering system, and we were feeling good because we've been improving all along until this last until this last monitoring period. We measured our first decline in overall reef health. And when you look into it more deeply, and we'll talk about this, it's largely due to fish biomass decreasing, and a lot of that was the parrotfish in Honduras. So over time, though, just looking at the numbers, we did increase from the low point, and herbivorous fish biomass was 1,196, and we got up to 2,389 this last time. So let's look at individual countries and look at these 4 indicators separately. So track the green line if you want to look at their biomass of herbivorous fish over time. This 2009 sample, I'll just tell you, that was the first year that we were like trying to get partners organized to share data and do all this. We had a much smaller sample size. I don't have that plotted on this, but considerably smaller number of samples in 2009 than any of the other years. So I'm not sure. A lot of times when we look at the data, it's a little bit of an aberration. And I think partly that may just be we did not have the funding and the partners yet to get into the field and get as much data. So treat it with a grain of salt. But in Belize, we got the parrotfish protection in 2009, and you can see that things continued to decrease until a little after the 2014 time period. That's when we began to see the minimal increases, but it really took longer than we thought it would. It was after the 2016 period that we began to see a significant increase. So parrotfish did not rebound as quickly as we hoped in Belize. We think there was pretty good compliance of the regulation. We did some testing of fish fillet, and it was I think about 90% of the samples tested were not parrotfish, so there was something else. But the idea ecologically is that once these guys increase in biomass, we should begin to see that decrease in fleshy macroalgae. And so if you look at the difference between 2016 and 2018, when the trajectory of the parrotfish biomass did go up, we do begin to see a decrease, the first decrease that we've really seen in that fleshy macroalgae, which is what we don't want to see more of on the reef. So here's Guatemala. They got their protection in 2015, and you can see a little bit quicker. We began to see after 2017 into that 2018 sample, we have a very small decrease. So that is an increase in the parrotfish biomass. Watch the green line. I was staring at the yellow. Watch the green line, and you can see the parrotfish increasing, and we would expect the macroalgae over the next sample period or the following one may begin to decrease as expected, with the lag, with a few more years lag once we have a significant increase in the parrotfish biomass. Mexico, the protection was just implemented, so we're really not expecting to see much of a change, although this last sample period also had an increase in parrotfish, and they're seeing a slight decrease in the fleshy macroalgae too. So the full protection, I'll talk about this towards the end as I get into the policy side, but Mexico did stages of protection with different parks. So many protections were already implemented by that 2016 time period or around then, but the final piece came in 2018. Honduras is a longer term. So this also began, and it's a partial protection. It's not the entire waters of Honduras as it was in Belize, but it began with the Bay Islands protected area in 2010. So that was full protection for parrotfish in the full region of Bay Islands. That's all of the Bay Islands. So that was a large area to be protected, and we began to see increases in the parrotfish biomass, the green line, and it took a long time, but began to see decrease in the fleshy macroalgae, although something happened, and we think it's related to really social disruption that was related to election results that were, disputed, and enforcement just fell off, and many of the government agencies there was a lot of turnover and changes, and things went awry, and that happened in early 2018. So we think that this is a social policy thing that resulted in lack of enforcement and just, not abiding by laws. So that we can kind of see in the data on the parrotfish. Now, what will happen with the macroalgae, probably kind of lagging behind that a few years, we'll have to see. So it's discouraging that even though it had been increasing, a change in the structure can mess that up. With the help of Coral Reef Alliance, we looked at site-specific changes. So this is the delta. This is the change in parrotfish biomass, just looking at those 2 years from all the repeated sites in Honduras. So the total sample of Honduras is a little bit larger than this, but we just took the paired sites where we had been able to get to those sites both these years, where you see the red circle, it says no change. If there was no change, everything would be along that line. And we would expect to see some increases and some decreases just kind of naturally, and then there should be a trend, but obviously all of the different zones, so the Cayos Cochinos, Guanaja, Roatan, Utila, and then the west coast, that's on the mainland coast, Those are the color-coded zones, and all of them show these massive declines. So it's kind of a similar situation with commercial fish. There's a few more that are increasing, and that is more related to the implementation of the no-take zones. So maybe the no-take zones are functioning a little better, but back to the parrotfish, we have a few of them that were increasing that are some of the same as those commercial fish that you can see a few small increases, but many more large decreases. And again, that's due to this kind of lack of enforcement or lack of abiding by the laws, and more pressure is what we think. One of the other data aspects that we wanted to explore is just, we know that the size frequency of the parrotfish varies by depth, or that's what we wanted to explore. So here you see 4 different depth ranges. Just look at the very top and you'll see 0 to, this is basically 0 to 3 meters. So that's the shallowest. Then you go over to the right and you'll see the next one, 3 to 6 meters. And then lower left is 6 to 10 and 10 to 16 in the right. So there weren't as many surveys done. This is the whole, not just Honduras, this is all of the MAR, all of our time periods pushed together. So you can see the total number of fish that were surveyed, number of surveys, and then how many fish per survey, which is also interesting. And you can see that although there weren't many surveys in the deep zone, we did have a higher frequency of fish, of parrotfish observed in that deeper zone, but also in the very shallow zone. So that was the next highest. Looking at the size frequency, as expected, there's more of the smaller juveniles recruiting into the shallow zones compared to the deep. If you just compare that upper left down to the lower right, that's the shallowest to the deepest zone of the reef. And then the one in the lower left is kind of, it's by far got the most number of fish, 75,000 fish in the survey. And that distribution looks fairly like the total distribution, like you lump all of the depth classes together. But I think, as we try to understand what happened to the fish in Honduras, and our instinct was to blame fishing, and that probably was it. We're also just looking at, what are the other, demographic trends within the population that we need to know and think about in terms of, could bleaching, we had warm water events during the same time period, significant ones, and the last one was it was worse in Honduras than it was in, say, Belize or Mexico. So these are a couple of the things that could have potentially also affected the parrotfish population in Honduras. But I wanted to also talk about a few others, and I think this has been mentioned, and Patricia mentioned the diadema. In Healthy Reefs, we're trying to focus on how can we restore the level of herbivory that should be on the reef in order to reduce the macroalgae. And so we have this top-down approach by protecting the fish. That's actually kind of the easiest thing to do, although it is difficult. And we'll talk about that in the last component of this talk, how you get that done. It's a measure, it's a regulatory measure. And once you do it, the ecosystem, there's enough of them out there that they should replenish. It may take 4 to 5 years to do that, but it should happen. And that is what we have seen in the areas in the MAR. Diadema have not recovered, and it's been 30 years. So this one needs more help and assistance. And we're going to have a webinar about that next Wednesday, July 1st. So tune in. And then king crab, we had a webinar already about this, and that is another area that we're trying to look into potential mariculture for getting them restored. Not forgetting that you can work from the top down, but we also need to look at those bottom-up controls. The macroalgae is the real problem that we're trying to address by getting herbivores on there, and the macroalgae is also responding to nutrients which are coming from wastewater and from agricultural livestock runoff. So yeah, that's what the wastewater is. Not always a nice pond. Sometimes we have things like that. That is Photoshop. It is just an idea of what we want to avoid. Okay, now is the last section of the talk where I will be flipping through the different ways that the region got their protections of parrotfish. So in Belize, it was 2008 was the International Year of the Reef, our first report card, and the Society of Reef Studies issued this declaration of management recommendations, including parrotfish, the suggestion to protect parrotfish. We talked about it with the Prime Minister. We got the fisheries people on board. Partners out at Glover's Reef had a lot of research, and it was done by 2009. And we have been promoting that at the COP in Copenhagen, promoting it to different leaders of the Caribbean and to our neighbors. But some of our neighbors have come in and wanted to exploit those fishers. As soon as the law was passed, then other countries came in. We responded with getting more enforcement and more awareness of, you know, it's not just passing a law that protects parrotfish. You also need to look at what are the implements, like the fisheries gear that can target the parrotfish. So we targeted spearfish and traps as things to also have another layer of protection. The Bay Islands was protected in 2010. Like I said, that was mainly through a conservation project. So that one had a different trajectory. They just did that as part of a big conservation project, but it was done all at once. It was fairly effective. And Tela, Honduras, this little protected area in the red dot, they've done a longer process, doing different levels of municipal, ministerial, and a lot of community-based work to get them to agree to that. In Guatemala, it was also a community-based participation, showing the data, a very, you know, collegiate process with these. It got a 5-year moratorium in 2015. Then they showed the data that they had actually, that had resulted in a doubling just in those few years. It's still in critical condition, so the numbers are still really low, but they have now added another 5 years to the protection, and they've added on surgeonfish, butterflyfish, and angelfish, just for good measure. In Mexico, is a very long process. A lot of partners, a lot of work. They first did it through CONAMP and the protected area system, protecting parrotfish within the parks. And then another layer was put in place in 2019 using the protected species list under special protection. So that is similar to what we're talking about with the SPA protocol. And that each of these 10 species had to be listed specifically, like with their densities, their size frequencies, mapping of them. So it was a very scientific process, and Melina Soto from Healthy Reefs can tell you more about that if you want to find out or get the copies of the information. But in the end, I think you need to just sell the big picture. These herbivores help keep a reef looking like that on the left and not like that on the right. And we use that to help build the momentum and the public support that we need to get this done. So thank you. With that, I'll stop.
Thank you, Melanie. Starts Robert. Yeah.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Good. Well, hi, everybody. I know there's a lot of material here. I'm going to talk about parrotfish and the recovery resilience of coral reefs, and I'll sort of end with a case study from Bonaire. I wanted to just, you know, resilience is a term that you hear a lot, but I think it's very important to realize that it has two components. Resilience both relates to an ecosystem resisting a disturbance, like a hurricane or something like that, or two, to recovery from the disturbance. And really, I'm talking about recovery resilience because we're not going to stop hurricanes and we're not going to stop bleaching. But first, I wanted to just, you know, put everybody on the same page, talk about some facts like the coral decline that we all know something about. You've seen this image many times before. I was part of the group that worked on this. The status and trends of Caribbean reefs, and it could be summarized best perhaps with this one figure where you have coral abundance on the y-axis and seaweed abundance on the x-axis. In the 1970s, you had a high abundance of coral and a low abundance of macroalgae. That shifted for reasons that you've already heard about. You know, the decline of the elkhorn and acropod corals, the sudden mass mortality of diadema. In any case, you end up with a world in the Caribbean that had relatively low coral cover and much higher algal abundance, and that has remained that way in many reefs. So now we have a lot of seaweed reefs, and although many coral reefs have become seaweed reefs, others have not. This picture of Bonaire. And one way you can look at this, which I think is important, this was from an early AGRRA study throughout the Caribbean, looking at the role of herbivores and seaweed abundance. And there's a very clear and statistically significant inverse relationship, meaning that places like Jamaica that had a very high, had very few parrotfish, lots of spearfishing, lots of trap fishing, seaweed abundance was high. Bonaire is on the other end of this spectrum. And there's much you can learn from that. But one of the things that I got interested in about 20 years ago was how do baby corals get started on reefs? And what is the role of algae and where do those baby corals get started? And one of the things that several studies showed is that if you look at a complex reef and you look to see, I put out these coral settlement plates or tiles, they're little squares, about 85% of the corals were on the underside, close to the edge of these plates. Now, why that matters is that, well, among other things, parrotfish are not grazing there. That's where they get started, and that's the nursery habitat. So I got interested in figuring out what is really controlling the abundance of algae and therefore controlling the abundance of juvenile corals, which would help the reefs recover. So I developed this design, which is called the Parrotfish Deterrent Device or Parrotfish Exclusion Device, knowing that the baby corals are going to recruit to the little space just on the underside of these plates. But these stainless steel rods are barriers to large parrotfish, but only large parrotfish. So if you look at the upper right-hand corner image, what you see is that's a control. You can see herbivores, a parrotfish can just graze wherever it wants, and you see the algal abundance is relatively low. If you look at the lower left, the small parrotfish actually could go right through, they could graze inside that area, and so it's ineffective to small parrotfish. But the big parrotfish, this is something that's important because they could not get in there, but the big parrotfish are the fish that are most susceptible to any kind of fishing pressure. And what we found was, at the end of a year, this is a control on the right and one of these parrotfish deterrent devices on the left, and you end up seeing what we would call a macroalgal bloom right around those posts. This would be the last thing a settling coral would see before it dies. And as a matter of fact, that space that's so important for these settling corals, that's completely blocked with algae. So when you look at the data, we published this some years ago, you look at seaweed abundance for the bare plates, the controls, and the parrotfish exclusion devices, and then you compare that to where we're finding the baby corals, we see that where you have excluded only the big parrotfish, the seaweed abundance is high. And on those plates, the baby corals or the juvenile corals are very low. These are newly settled corals. Looking at the data in a slightly different way, but it's important. If you just look at the seaweed abundance on the lower part of this graph, going from 0 to some high number, and if you look at the corals that are recruiting, you find that the dominant corals that are recruiting are declining as seaweed increases, but a major reef building coral drops down to 0 at a certain level of seaweed abundance. This is critical because, of course, you need baby corals to have a reef recover after a bleaching event, a hurricane, a ship strike, you name it. So the translation is, parrotfish herbivory may be necessary for controlling seaweed and maintaining the recovery resilience of coral reefs. So this is a picture I took in Jamaica at Discovery Bay, but I wanted to summarize very briefly that seaweed is trouble for coral reefs. There are studies that show that they poison corals. There are other studies that show that the reproductive output of corals declines with abundant macroalgae. Other other papers say that it kills baby corals. Nobody likes a baby killer, right? The reduced coral recruitment is well documented. And there is a caveat though. Herbivores, especially parrotfish, can reduce the algal abundance and improve the recruitment. And so this is the bright spot, because these herbivores can control all these negative facts, and they can actually put an end to the bad hombres on the reefs, which are the macroalgae, the seaweeds. So in Bonaire, this is the case study. That's the background to this case study. It's an example, I think, of successful management. I could actually argue some of it is by accident, but it is good management, and it gives us some cause for optimism. Bonaire, as you probably know, is in the Southern Caribbean, and its reefs are very well known as having this low algal biomass. But why so little seaweed? How did it get that way? Well, the brief history is as follows. Scuba diving became really important early on in the 1960s. A lot of people, local Bonaireans, were very eager to go and spear fish. And I got this from one of the Bonaireans who'd been fishing there since the 1950s. And they're very proud of what they caught. And you can see this big collection of spear guns. But then the fishing community decided, you know, within a decade, the big fish were disappearing. And actually it was in 1971, the Bonaire fishermen agreed to stop spearfishing. As far as I know, it's the first place in the world that voluntarily stopped spearfishing in an entire island. That was 1971. And parrotfish are very easy targets. They're poor swimmers, as you know. They're easy to shoot, especially the big ones. They also tend to go into fish traps. As it happens, fish traps were not used much in Bonaire. They had no history of fish traps. So the results that I'm going to show you on fish abundance, I think it's important to say, well, compared to what? Are parrotfish in Bonaire more abundant than other places? And so I'm going to suggest a paper that I published in 2018, which included 800 kilometers of reefs from St. Croix down to the Grenadines, where we did fish surveys and coral surveys. And we looked at places that had fished areas, and also no-take reserves. And this is just as a sense of comparison for what we found in Bonaire. So when we go and look at the parrotfish in Bonaire, you can see a pattern like this. We could talk about some of the details, but I think what matters here is that when we compare what we see in Bonaire to the Eastern Caribbean, the no-take reserves, in fact, were really just a fraction of the averages that we were getting even on the worst years of parrotfish. As a matter of fact, when you looked at what some of the talks you just heard, all of these values for just parrotfish are on the very good range. So parrotfish are abundant. So what I described, the absence of spearfishing, they not only had no history of traps. When traps started getting used in Bonaire, in 2010, they phased fish traps out. So basically, there's no fish trapping. It's only hook and line fishing. What about the coral? Interestingly, the very first quantitative survey done by AGRRA was Kramer and Bischoff, 2004, and that's not exactly the same Kramer you just heard a seminar from, but they're related. High coral cover. Look at that. It's over 45%. And in 2003, my group started monitoring fixed sites at 10 meters at up to 11 sites in Bonaire. And we're getting very consistently high abundance of live coral. In 2010, there was a massive bleaching event. And when we look at the live coral and the bleaching event, you saw this decline in the coral cover. And that's in 2011. We were doing these surveys every 2 years. By 2013, it was even lower. But then by 2015, it started going up. By 2017, it was back to the pre-bleaching levels, and we found no statistical difference in 2019. When you look at seaweed abundance, it was very, very low. I use an algal index. It's a combination of percent cover and the area cover and the canopy height. And this is very low value. But after the bleaching event, with lots of dead coral, the algal abundance increased. But then it started declining 2013, 2015, 2017. So we're down close to where we were prior to the bleaching event. Importantly, the Eastern Caribbean average, using the same metrics, are so much higher that I can't even plot it on this graph. So the highest value we ever had was a fraction of even the best areas in the Eastern Caribbean. So what we're saying is parrotfish abundance remained high, algal abundance was low, but when it spiked up due to the bleaching, it declined in a steady manner. And the only explanation that we can come up with, there's no change in nutrients or anything else. The only explanation is that over time, the parrotfish grazed it back down. So this is an important trend because this, of course, is going to have an effect on juvenile corals. And when we looked at juvenile coral abundance, you see that what we're seeing there is somewhat of a decline from a high in 2005. But by 2015, after the coral abundance was starting to increase, the algal abundance was declining, we saw juvenile corals increasing in a fairly large way. If we compare this then to the Eastern Caribbean, notice that even the no-take reserves had considerably lower juvenile coral abundances, and the fished area is even lower yet. So the bottom line is that that any disturbance to the reef is going to recover from these juvenile corals that are able to settle. And because of the consistently high abundance of parrotfish and the consistently low abundance of algae, you had consistently high juvenile coral abundances. So if I go back to this Caribbean average that I showed you earlier from the Jackson et al. Paper, if we plot Bonaire at 10 meters today, or 2019, you see that actually it's even better than the Caribbean average of the 1970s. And I do think it has an awful lot to do with the herbivores. There are other factors that we could get into if you wanted to. But I think this is really important. By the way, everything that you've heard in my talk has been published. And as a matter of fact, I published last year a study documenting the recovery resilience in Bonaire's reefs and how it has rebounded completely from climate-induced bleaching and hurricanes over the last, this period of time over the last 15 years. So my conclusions are as follows: that Bonaire may be the first clear example of a resilient coral reef ecosystem in the Caribbean, resulting from elimination of a harvest of parrotfish. It suffered from hurricane and coral bleaching, but it recovered fully and remains healthy. It shows that local fisheries management, protecting especially parrotfish and working with local communities, can improve the recovery resilience of Caribbean coral reefs. And with that, I thank you. Gracias to all of you. And I also thank all the people who helped on many of these projects, including all the work we've been doing over the last 20 years in Bonaire. Thank you all.
Thank you, Bob. And thanks again for joining us to everybody. I would like to highlight some of the key elements presented by our speakers. And afterwards, we will start the question and answer session. So please, we invite you again to send your questions. We already have several, really thank you. We are going to group some of them. So we hear from Patricia Kramer, status and trends of parrotfish in the Caribbean, update from AGRRA program, that fishery-independent measures of parrotfish population are critical for the management of Caribbean coral reefs. The most useful indicators of parrotfish population in the context of reef functions and management are biomass and size-specific sicking frequencies. Species-specific responses to fishing pressure can be highly variable depending on life histories and vulnerability. Protecting the entire gale of parrotfish will have the greatest benefit to coral reef function, followed by species or size-specific fisheries measures that increase protection for more abundant and larger body parrotfish. For example, queen, yellowtail, redtail, stoplight, and red band. Then we hear from Bryce Simmons from the scripts. Long-term trends in Caribbean parrotfish abundance and regional and basin-wide scales, implication for fisheries and ecosystem management. We hear that within regions like Coral Islands, population of parrotfish species coverage, suggesting all species respond similarly to environmental anthropogenic forcing, storms and fisheries. Between regions, Cayman Islands and Bonaire, individual parrotfish species do not cover, suggesting population trajectories vary considerably across the Caribbean. Findings suggest that while management aimed and recovering parrotfish should account for regional differences in ecology and fisheries, parrotfish should be managed as a group. Then we hear from Melanie McPhail, the presentation of collaborative monitoring and reporting the help protect parrotfish and improve reef health in the Mesoamerican Reef. Herbivorous fish biomass contributes a quarter of the value for healthy reefs index, with parrotfish accounting for 75% within that group. It is the easiest of the 4 reef health indicators to increase, with several regulatory options. Once protected parrotfish biomass has increased after 4 or 5 years, followed by a decrease of fleshy macroalgae 2-3 years after the fish increase. Many other factors are affecting the speed of recovery, and enforcement must be maintained. Each country in the Mesoamerican Reef has taken a different socialization and regulatory path to protect parrotfish. Use the tools that best suit your national context. Finally, from Robert Stegner, Parrotfish and Recovery Resilience of Coral Reefs, a case study from Bonaire, we hear that the experiments show herbivory from large parrotfish facilitate coral recruitment by limiting harmful macroalgae. Bonaire managed favored parrotfish by being the first island in the Caribbean to ban spearfishing in 1971, had almost no fish traps, and was hook and line fishing only. Following a massive coral bleaching event in 2010, macroalgae increased, but was grazed down by parrotfish, and by 2017, coral abundance returned to pre-bleaching abundance. So those are our main aspects that we found in their presentation. And now I'm gonna read some of the questions that we have. So the first one for Patricia is a commentary and a question. For those islands with parrotfish as a key commercial species, it can be quite difficult to get the island society to give up consuming parrotfish as it is so ingrained in their culture, for example, Jamaica. Are there any alternatives to complete ban on parrotfish, for example, quotas or seasonal fishing? Please, Patricia, can you respond? After that, I'm gonna make a question for Bryce.
Hi, yeah, thank you. That is a very good question, and I think that's weighs heavily on everyone's mind because that's the reality factor. In I guess an ideal world, we could just all stop fishing and everything would be protected, but we do have to support coastal communities and livelihoods, and it is going to be a challenge. I think there are alternatives. There are ways to decrease, like if you cannot do a full ban, maybe protect certain species that are, as we pointed out earlier, some of those larger species that are more susceptible to either spearfishing or to trap fishing. You can change some of the methods and techniques that they're using. Like Bob was talking about in Bonaire, the fishermen decided on their own to stop spearfishing, and that had a huge advantage. Or just rotating areas and giving fish a break. There's lots of little parrotfish out there. They can rebound quickly, much more so than, say, groupers and snappers. So if you give them a break, you have the potential to let some of those populations rebound. So I think it's something to look at your specific area. Bryce mentioned this, that even though we focus, maybe on national policies, sometimes local management also can be very effective, and you have to take into consideration what the local communities want. So that's where the dialogue comes from, and that's where science and people meet. So I think there are alternatives, especially like if you can remove traps and not have traps, because that is kind of an indiscriminate fishing method, and it kind of catches everything, or build traps differently so that you have less of an impact. So I think there are ways, and we'd love to continue the conversation. Feel free to reach out with me or any of the other panelists, and we can talk more.
Thank you, Patricia. Now one from Bryce. Bottom-up effects, nutrients, or top-down effects, parrotfish and surgeonfish. What is the trend regionally speaking?
If I understand the question correctly, it's focused on what are the trends in nutrient loading regionally. Is that correct?
Yes.
Yeah, so that's a great question, and one that I personally don't know the answer to. I'm not sure if there is actually very good regional coverage in terms of those types of data, certainly as a time series. I do wonder about that quite a bit. I think we tend to think of the process of coral decline being punctuated impacts of corals in terms of bleaching or storms, followed by failure of recruitment, as kind of Bob alluded to, based on the fact that you don't have herbivores controlling dominant space competitors. But it is certainly true that fleshy algae responds quite well to nutrients. It's kind of their thing. So there is no doubt in certain places, like for instance in the Florida Keys, that nutrient loadings have played probably a pretty significant role in the transition from more coral dominated to more algal dominated reefs. So other panelists might know a lot more about what data exists for nutrients and nutrient time series across the Caribbean, but to my knowledge, there isn't a central go-to piece of information for that.
Thank you, Bryce. And now a question for Melanie. What are the most effective policies and measures to conserve population of herbivorous species in the Mesoamerican Reef System? And one more small question, where is possible to take healthy reefs training?
Well, okay, the last question was, what is the most up-to-date training?
No, if it's possible to take healthy reef training and where?
Well, I mean, our trainings are normally focused on the 4 countries that we're serving, but we have sent our coordinators into other areas, and that would be normally organized by AGRRA. So our trainers can go to other areas if you work with AGRRA to develop a course. So it's probably easier to bring, the trainers there and then train a whole set of maybe 10 to 15 people in your country or your island, or you get a couple islands close together. So I would say just follow up with Patricia Kramer and myself about that, because that's organized by AGRRA and then sometimes assisted by Healthy Reefs, unless you're in one of our countries. And we just had to cancel our training for this year, so it'll be next spring. So the other question, what is the most effective means? Well, I mean, the most effective, I guess, is just a whole out ban on fishing. So either way you do that. So Belize did it nationwide through a fisheries regulation, and that, it's fairly easy to enforce that, because there's a requirement to keep skin a skin tag, section, so you can see what species of fish it is, even if it's filleted. So that way, you prevent the fishing of the fish through a fisheries regulation. In Mexico, the way they did the 10 species, which are the main species, as a protected species, that's a different, that's using the laws that are typically for endangered species, like jaguars and things, and saying this species is critically important for the ecosystem it protects. And it'll all depend on enforcement, how well that works, because it's not the guys in the water, the fisheries agents that are the ones that should enforce that. So I think that's really important that you keep in mind who's enforcing it and keep it as close to the enforcers as possible.
Thank you, Melanie. And our last question for Dr. Bob Stegneck. What is the role of functional redundancy in parrotfish and surgeonfish structure for the Caribbean region?
That's a good question. And there's been a fair amount written about it. I think that the best evidence that I've seen is from a paper that was done, a study that was done in the Dominican Republic that showed that the diversity of parrotfish is almost as important as the biomass of parrotfish. So rather than having just a hyperabundance of, let's say, a stoplight parrot, if you have a diversity, you're going to do a more effective job of keeping the reef clean. And what we do know is that there is selectivity in terms of the types of substrates and the types of seaweed and detritus, the little stuff that's growing in with the turfs, so that the full complement of species is most effective in terms of keeping the algal abundance to a small height and allowing the conditions to be best for the corals that are settling.
Thank you, Bob. And that was our last questions. And we want to say thank you to everybody. Thank you to our speakers. It was a great, really great webinar. We have many people from many places. And if you need more information, you can see in our screens or websites. And also all the webinar and the presentation are going to be in AIDA's website. So thank you a lot to everybody. This is an open mic to say goodbye and thanks. So I don't know if someone wants to add something more, but thank you.
Thank you for organizing it.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, and thank you to all participants.
Thank you very much.
Gracias.
See you soon. Bye.
Bye.